Hey everybody, welcome to Proc-N-Roll. We are your guide to practical procurement where we make procurement rock and roll. Let's get ready to go here. We have Natasha, our pro CPO. She spent time at IBM, McKesson, Salesforce, and most recently Nike. And now the founder and CEO of a really cool consulting business for procurement, Candor Procurement. If you need help in procurement, she's the one that can help you with her candor. She is freaking awesome, and you need to talk to her. And of course, Conrad, myself, self-proclaimed innovator. I worked at Intel. I was a CPO at Adobe, and now founder of one of the hottest procurement startups out there, Graphite. Really proud of what we're doing. It's very cool. And last but not least, Zach, working at KPMG, you're expert in all things procurement. Together, we bring about 70 years of practical procurement experience. And here on Proc-N-Roll, we discuss the latest and greatest trends, topics in procurement. So jumping into today's discussion, all I have to say is, wow, holy cow, what is going on with the world? If you're watching the news, you're freaking out like I am. I don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. What is the White House doing? What is Trump doing? How is it all of a sudden everyone working anywhere in procurement and supply chain, turn the clock back? This is almost like COVID again. This is like driving everything into a brick wall, and everyth's different right now. So what are you guys seeing out there? Zach and Natasha, are you seeing the same thing I am with this?
Yeah, panic, I think. A lot of teams, tariff response teams being put together by different organizations try and understand what's going on. And I think it's a lot of procurement people are very busy right now for the wrong reasons. But I don't know about you, Natasha.
Well, frankly, these times remind me of 2001 when I get in the business school and our professor of macroeconomics, Dan Blakely, was jumping up and down from excitement because he said, finally, we have something to teach students these days. Enron collapses. Arthur Andersen is burning and shredding the files. Stock market collapses. There's so much stuff happening. He said, we used to teach for the last 10 years. Nothing was happening. Now life is happening. So I'm looking at it from the perspective, is it troubling time? For sure. Is it it's a time of instability, unpredictability, and very high volatility? Absolutely. And to me, as a person, as a human being with reduced bank account, it gives me worries. But as procurement professional, I rejoice because I believe it's an opportunity for us to shine, to bring to the business something that we do the best. And I think we'll discover it and uncover it in this episode.
Well, it is outstanding to be in the role that can really make a difference. I'm just taking a quick look at the news here. I just popped it up here online. Automakers stall pickups at U.S. ports, hoping for tariff relief. I mean, remember COVID when the ports were all jammed up with stuff? Terrible timing, huge uncertainty. Ports and shipping are, how these ports and this is going to just like COVID and everything that happened there. It's just going to create this trickle, the bubbles, the inventory, just a whole host of problems. This, by the way, it isn't like we know what the problem's going to be either, right? I think it's really easy to go, okay, this is a Trump negotiation tactic, and maybe it's going to go away in 90 days or something. I think that's probably not a great idea to take that assumption. Just quick for anyone that's been hiding under a rock, right? Everything happening in tariffs these days. Baseline tariffs on 10% of most imports, substantially higher tariff to China. A lot of the retaliatory tariffs they're out there. Reciprocal tariffs that are out there have been put on pause, but this 10% still remains. There's a lot of changes every day about components that are being included or excluded from the tariffs. It's really hard to plan, right? Because these are moving targets. Behind all this basis stuff, there is discussion about Section 232, which, I didn't know what that was until I went and did some more research. This is national security claims and consideration. We all coming out of COVID knew that there were concerns around the world that we didn't all have access to certain medical supplies and other things like that. So this national security consideration is really looking at semiconductors, pharmaceutical products, critical materials, and derivative products. I mean, there's a lot happening. It's almost impossible to get your head around all of the aspects of what's in play right here. But practically back at work, what this is turning into is the budgets are being cut. Almost every organization that's in any sort of product selling business, there's concern about our own company's revenue. All of us have suppliers that are going to be impacted. You can't do business and not have suppliers that are impacted in one form or fashion. Some of those might be raw material, some of those might be supply chain suppliers. Some of those might just be indirect suppliers that are going to be, that rely on supply chain suppliers for their infrastructure or what they're delivering for us as well. So lots to unpack here, lots to understand. Totally transparent. We're not the source for you to learn and understand what all these tariffs are. You've got to monitor it. You got to go figure it out. You got to go find it. But when it comes down to what do we do about it in procurement, there's a few basic things that we need to do, right? Number one, I would say denial is not a good strategy here. Wait and see is not a good strategy. Natasha, you were talking about COVID. COVID opened up the kind of vulnerability and fragility of many of our supply chains, right? Where we had single points of failure, countries that are almost the sole provider of certain raw materials or the sole provider of certain manufacturing. What have you seen kind of as you're looking around in your, looking back in your past jobs and career, companies that you talk to, what's your perspective on how far along we should be already in making our supply chains more resilient? And yet here we are questioning the resiliency of our supply chains again.
Absolutely. I would say that probably the best motto that supply chain professionals should embrace is that someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree long time ago. I think it's a beautiful proverb that actually is talking exactly about that. It's proactive adaptation. Because if someone is freaking out today, that means someone fell asleep at the wheel 3, 5, 10 years ago, right? Because if your core product is concentrated more than 50-60% in a particular country, or like even it's just in the multiple countries in one region, like Southeast Asia, then you probably had to adopt 3, 4, 5 years ago a mindset of, I need to diversify. And yes, it takes a very long time to build alternative source somewhere else, let's say in Latin America. But as a supply chain planner, as a supply chain proactive thinker, and I think proactivity is very important here, because if someone didn't have a plan and got hit with tariffs today, that it's kind of like it's a bit too late to say, what's the plan now? Now, there's no plan. Right now, you just have to connect. Like, if you don't have a plan, that almost like you have nothing else to do other than wait and see or build plan for the future. So, and I think that this proactive thinking and this adaptation of like, we all set today, we produce well, we have solid relationships with manufacturers. We have good relationships with the governments and the countries in Southeast Asia. We have access to qualified labor. We have enough capacity to produce multiple, like hundreds and thousands of different SKUs. And we have good relationships with the shippers. We have good contracts. We know all ocean providers and all of that. Great for you. Now build for 5 years from now, because we know that shit will happen in some shape or form, because it always has, right? And it's always been something is happening every 5 years. So build that capacity in advance. Like if we take Apple, because, and Tim Cook was very public about it, that maybe when we started producing iPhones in China 20 years ago, it was a market of a cheap labor. It ain't cheap anymore, right? But it's still a market of very qualified labor and very vast market of qualified labor where they can have labor capacity anytime. But does it mean that they also should look, from my perspective, in my humble opinion, should they look at, let's say, Uruguay, Paraguay, Ecuador, Colombia, Mauritius, New Zealand, and start building there? Today, from my perspective, yes. The question is whether companies want to have such a massive capital exposure so much in advance.
So, Zach, COVID was this giant wake-up call for all of us, right, on the supply chain side. What did you see across organizations that you were working with? Did you see them respond to that in a very reactive way and then kind of, thank goodness that's done? Or did they retool their supply chains for the next wake-up call that we're in right now?
I think there was a bit more retooling. I think you're right, Conrad. COVID was supposed to be the wake-up call, right? And you remember all the issues that followed that, Evergreen and the Suez Canal, etc. That at that point, I remember having so many conversations with different procurement professionals about resilience and the importance of resilience, right? And this word resilience became really the top sort of trend in looking at your supply chain. However, a lot of procurement pros would say, well, great, you're telling me I need to be more resilient, but I have this massive problem I need to deal with now. My stock is locked up somewhere. I can't get to it. So I do wonder if, things having settled down a bit after the COVID issues, did procurement teams take enough of a step back and say, you know what, let's just, protect ourselves from this ever happening again, right? And I do think, it's very hard to predict the future, and no one could have seen this tariff war coming in the way that it came, ramping up so quickly. I think, there's always been increasing trade tensions, more geopolitical instability. I think, look, broadly, the theme is, as the world's becoming more geopolitically unstable, the shift, the prioritization definitely is going from cost and efficiency over to resilience, security of supply, obviously still at the best possible cost that you can get it. But it feels like this is a new normal for a long time, in terms of being able to secure supply, have the best relationships, have redundant suppliers as well that you've built up to in different parts of the world. So you really need to insulate your supply chain from these shocks. We had COVID, we had these tariffs. How many more? Is it unrealistic to expect that we get another shock in a few more years? I don't think so. So yes, I agree with Natasha. Now's a great opportunity for procurement teams to reassess and reevaluate, but make sure you do it for good this time. Make sure you take this as the new normal, right, of the way things are going to be in the future.
Yep. The wake-up call is just going to keep ringing, right? Like you're laying in the hotel room, you ignore it, it comes back 10 minutes later, it comes back. Like this is wake-up call number 2. Hopefully most of you out there are 5 years into retooling your supply base, diversifying the countries, the supply, all of these things that if we didn't, we're all wishing that we did at the time. But if not, practically now is the time to do that, because absolutely there's going to be another wake-up call. 3 to 5 years from now, things are going to change. There's just so much. Our world is changing so quickly around us, right? And maybe that comes in the flavor of AI completely transforming manufacturing and services. But there is just going to be one thing after another, and we need to rely on that, not get comfortable. So let's get practical now. What are the things that we can and should do, whether we're reacting or we're partially into our transformation? If we are, large manufacturers, everything else, Natasha, you mentioned this could be like a 10-year thing. You could only be halfway done. So you may still need to react and plan right now. There are 3 key steps that we've talked about that we can go tackle and do. And I want to dive into all 3 of these, get your perspective on these, both of you. Step 1 really is about visibility to the supply chain, the suppliers, and the problem, right? That's kind of obvious and intuitive. Let's talk about that. Then of course, diversification. What can we do? Is there anything we can do in the short term or even the more strategic long term? And then a little bit more tactically, maybe, can we make adjustments in how we're how we're negotiating with suppliers, what our contracts look like, and such. All of these 3 steps are not vacuum steps that procurement supply chain does alone, right? Jack, you mentioned that tariff teams and tariff responses, like everybody's getting their teams together and working on this. So if you're not already working in a team, you need to figure out, are you just not at the table and the meetings are taking place, or like the whole organization is just waiting and hoping, and you need to step up as a leader and bring the teams together and get these discussions going. But procurement supply chain absolutely needs to be at the table. Let's tackle number 1, which Zach, I want to start with you. What's your perspective on how we go about doing deep supply chain visibility mapping, right? How do we pinpoint where we really have these vulnerabilities to tariff or other disruptions in the supply chain?
Well, I hope a lot of teams already know, especially for their strategic products, strategic SKUs, et cetera, that are going to be impacted by tariffs, a level of insight into the supply chain for those kinds of products, right? But if you don't, you got to start with the bill of materials, right? Get a breakdown of all the different components that are essential for the products that you're selling. And do you know where each of these components are coming from? So even if one supplier is providing you the finished product, let's say, do you know where that supplier is getting their components, or maybe even in some cases raw materials from? I think that's really the step 1. You got to do the supply chain mapping. 80/20 is always really helpful here, right? Because of the uncertainty, because of how fast things are moving, and because you have limited resources. So definitely start with, where are you going to feel most of this impact, both to your margin or to your sales volume? I'd probably put those lenses on it. And then you want to have that bill of materials, map out your suppliers, and then you want to contact those suppliers and say, hey, where are your suppliers, right? There are tools out there that you can use to do more detailed supply chain mapping if you want to get to T3, Tier 4, Tier 5, etc. But really, I think for now, getting at least a couple of tiers down into your supply chain is essential. And I know a lot of procurement teams just aren't there, right? Some of them are, some of them will be ready, but a lot of teams just aren't. And I think that's kind of the step 1 into gaining the visibility. I think another thing that you got to keep on top of is the changing landscape, right? So these tariffs are changing all the time. The retaliations are coming left, right, and center. And it can be very hard to interpret kind of where exactly these tariffs will hit. What exactly are they going to impact in your costs? And so you need to make sure that you're speaking to experts who have that technical proficiency, right? And I'd say like freight forwarders could be a great example of this, because they need to deal with this on your behalf. So make sure your relationships are solid with the providers, the service providers that are actually helping you move goods around the world, right? So make sure that, obviously, I think it'll be very hard even getting through to some of them now, because they're just absolutely swamped with inquiries from different customers. But that's where you should be focused on, I think, right now. Map out your suppliers. You're down to as many tiers as you can get in the time, and yeah, just stay on top of it, basically.
It's too bad this isn't all happen 10 years in the future when AI agents will do all of this mapping for us, right? But I think that this is what we're talking about here. End-tier mapping of the SKU and the suppliers is a relatively complicated thing, right? Because this isn't public information. There are AI tools out there that are trying to sort of harvest a bunch of this thing and predict what these end-tier mappings look like. But think about many of your suppliers who don't want to divulge who their suppliers are for competitive reasons, right? Where and how they're doing certain things. This isn't all public information. So you need that mapping from them, but they also need you to keep it confidential. So it's this whole, not in every case, but there's this whole complex exercise of building out that the chain and identifying the vulnerabilities.
Yeah, so definitely have an NDA. So when you're talking to those suppliers, have that in place, because you got to put them at ease. But you can also reward them. You can say, look, help me just secure my supply chain or get my visibility into my supply chain. In return, we'll make you a preferred vendor, or we'll keep you as a preferred vendor, or we'll commit to a long-term agreement with you, right? Or we'll share data from us with you as well, so that it's not just one way. So yeah, definitely it's going to take a little bit of creativity. It's not just data mapping and analysis. It is about relationships. It's about how creative you can be in working with those suppliers and getting them to work with you and prioritize you as their primary customer. And that takes hard work. That just takes a lot of communication, a lot of repeat follow-ups and knocking on the supplier's door. I say it's a bit of a competition. You're right, Conrad, for sure.
But you don't want to be the last one knocking on their door for sure. It's time to step up. So all of this leads to identifying critical points of failure or exposure, maybe financial risk. Natasha, how have you seen people approach this? Zach mentioned some tools that are out there. If you were, and you were in the past, right? But if you were sitting in a chair today facing these challenges, how would you approach it? What tools might you consider, or what processes might you consider to tackle this huge? I mean, it is a bit daunting, folks. Let's get real, especially if you. I love what you said, Zach. Which, like, at least go down a couple tiers. It's easy to get bogged down thinking all the way down to raw materials, right? Because some of these countries are almost the sole provider of the raw materials that are coming up through your supply chain to get into your products. Natasha, how would you think about this? Getting visibility and pinpointing the vulnerabilities.
So I think every procurement professional, regardless of the title, but CPOs or heads of procurement and their direct reports for sure, have to embrace the mentality of having very acute understanding of how companies make money. And I'll tie it together, so bear with me. It also goes into what we covered in the previous episodes about switching from functional leader to enterprise leader. When you're functional leader and you're traditionally thinking about procurement metrics, that you have to deliver cost savings and spend under management and all of that. And in all fairness, risk mitigation and resilience, it's either not on our scorecards or it's very distant 5th, 6th, 7th priority. And what current situation demonstrates is that this risk mitigation and resilience could be significantly higher in prioritization, which also means that you as a procurement professional and as a procurement leader have to be very, very clear where the company makes money, what drives the revenue, and therefore what drives the risk. Because right now we obviously focusing on everything that is sitting in Asia and what needs to be shipped across the ocean, because that's kind of like that's the top of mind where a lot of products are made that US consumes. But we're not thinking right now that what if I have a contact center in the Philippines and in India, and my services will get taxed, and that's a critical service and critical link to my customers, to my consumers. What if my tech center is sitting somewhere in Romania, right? Or in Poland, and that's going to get tariffed differently. So what I'm bringing it to is that it's not enough for us to understand is that, I'm working for a retail company, so the t-shirts and hoodies that we sell in the store, this is how we make money. No, we make money at where do we make money and where do we spend money? And as a procurement professionals, we're not frequently tasked with breaking down this entire product life cycle, because we always come at the last point at the end of fixing the price, selecting the supplier, and putting the contract in place. But if we understand the whole product life cycle that the company is involved in producing goods or services that it sells to the customers, and this is how the company generates revenue, then we will understand the key points of where expenses hit. And we can proactively, at this point, proactively for the future, we're going to start cleaning how to how to protect the company for possible risks that may happen at every step of the way. Some of these risks and some of this protection you will shift on the suppliers, but some of them you will be able to implement within enterprise.
I love that. I mean, what I'm getting from what you're describing is how important it is for procurement to think bigger than procurement, understand the business. How does the business work? What are the critical levers in the business? On all sides, not just what you're buying, but what you're selling as well, right? Approaching our role and our job as a business expert of the business, that's amazing. That kind of moves you from, are you a procurement professional doing business, or are you a business professional doing procurement, right? And I've always believed the best thing to do is, like, I am a business professional. I happen to be working in procurement today, but I care about business generally and the success of the business generally, and that visibility and that insight really helps me approach my job in a different way.
Because you posed the question, not the question, you made the statement, procurement has to have a seat at the table. But if I arrive to that table with my procurement agenda without understanding the business, I may not be invited to that room second time. I have to understand the business, right? And that's the shift from functional mentality to enterprise mentality. And I think the same mentality should be for the head of tax, because head of tax need to understand, in order to build a smart taxation strategy for the company, what are all the elements of our product flow?
Yeah, we can't make these decisions in a vacuum. We can't work in a vacuum. Absolutely. So mapping out the visibility, get insight, understanding the pinch points here. Step 2, really from a practical perspective, is, okay, what can we do with that? How do we diversify and cultivate alternatives? It is really hard right now. Wake up call in the middle of reaction mode. If you don't have options, Natasha and Zach, that you were talking about, is there anything that you can do at this point? Or are you just, how would you approach it, Zach?
It's a must do, right? There's no can or can't. You have to go and find alternative sources of supply. You have to understand, how tariffs and supply chains work globally. I mean, some of it's not rocket science. There is 145% tariff on China. So literally, if you even, and certain categories like steel and aluminum, etc. So the question is, if you use those materials in your products, even if you don't know exactly where the raw material supplier is, it's going to be hit with a massive tariff, and you're going to have to absorb these costs. I think, just when Natasha was talking, the only thing I could keep thinking is, can you really mitigate all of the cost impacts here? And my feeling is, no. I feel like companies are going to go through quite a lot of pain, or consumers if companies end up raising prices, right? Because some of these tariffs are just so huge, you don't really know where how companies can really absorb them. So it doesn't matter that you can't fix the problem completely. You still need to go out and do your scanning the market, understanding who alternative providers are, start engaging with those providers. By the way, it won't be fun, because when you go out and find a new provider, you're going to send them an email. They're not going to reply to you because they're already busy with 10 other new customers that have also approached them as an alternative source of supply. But I'd say do it anyway, right? Just keep trying to build those relationships. Ultimately, I think we've talked a lot on this podcast, and that's where procurement's value is going to be in the future in terms of handling supplier relationships, understanding supply network, the entire supply network and supply chain, using tools in AI to achieve that as well. So I would say, yes, you need to diversify. You need to find these new suppliers. You need to engage with them, even if they might not seem that responsive. You just still need to do that, because it will pay off in a year or a year and a half. Okay. Or maybe less when you get lucky. And I'd say also, a bulk of the focus will also have to be negotiate with your current suppliers, right, Conrad? Ultimately, that is your current source of supply. You don't need to take 6 to 12 months to find and onboard new suppliers, switch, factory locations and, etc. So maybe you need to engage with your current suppliers. And that's going to take a lot of open, honest conversations. So think about how you can incentivize the current suppliers to really work with you and prefer you over all their other customers, right? So these suppliers have a lot of power now, as they did back when COVID happened.
There's two sides here, right? It isn't like you have solved the problem. You're suffering and you got to solve the problem. Your suppliers have a problem too, right? Everybody has a problem now. And so it really is maybe a bit empowering to realize that you don't have to solve this by yourself. You shouldn't be trying to solve this by yourself. You should be talking, you should be collaborating, you should be open. Like if you and your current supplier can't solve this problem together, they're losing business. And you're losing a source of supply. So there should be a healthy amount of willingness to collaborate and find out what alternatives there are.
Exactly.
And there's some creative things I'm thinking, right? Like even the car guys leaving their cars on the docks for a little while. But there are free trade zones. There's a whole bunch of other things that you may or may not be participating in with that supplier because it wasn't as important as it is now. But yeah, that collaboration probably has hopefully has the opportunity to unlock some mitigations that you guys haven't, you and your supplier haven't been taken advantage of yet.
I think
Sorry, Zach,
this reminds me what we spoke about also in our previous episodes, that your suppliers are your best source of knowledge, of market intel, and very often procurement professionals think about suppliers as a nuisance, as they eating our lunch, and speak rather negatively and don't give the right level of attention to the suppliers. I never subscribe to that perspective, but I would say having productive brainstorm and productive and collaborative relationships with suppliers will allow you to have a very kind of mindful planning today, right? But you can't come to the table today when the problems hit your doorstep and say, "Hey, can help me out now." But if you cultivate very healthy relationships with your suppliers that are rooted on partnership, rooted on proactive thinking, on planning, on understanding the industry, and you keep your knowledge to high degree of your industry, then it kind of like organically, this dialogue will organically happen, even if you are not the highest paid customer with the highest volume. At the same time, as a procurement professional, you always have to cultivate alternatives. You always have to look at different markets for different services, right? And earlier in my career, I was very much into supply consolidation, into like having one supplier, give them all the business, easier to manage. They have greater leverage, greater buying power. Later in my career, I changed my perspective. I would purposefully split the business 80-20, one as a senior partner, another as a junior partner, but it creates healthy competition and it also protects the company. What if one will fall flat on their feet? For various reasons that may happen to the other business, right? They may have their own set of troubles. So it's very healthy and it's very necessary. And this situation is a great reminder for us procurement professionals that build strategic relationships with strategic providers, keep close communication with them, have very open collaboration and open a lot of doors for them, help them to grow the business and rely on their knowledge of the market. At the same time, build alternatives and alternatives in providers. Also maybe provide suggestions on alternative of what your company produces. Maybe if your analysis shows that the cost of aluminum will not going to, reduce like in the next 4 or 5 years, then have conversation with R&D. What are the other options?
Yeah. Well, it's, we get in these blue sky times of like everything's great and some of these activities you're describing almost feel like a waste of time, or they're taking away from like consolidating value and negotiating all these other things. But we have to plan on these kind of rainy days, right? This is the new norm now. These big disruptions. I've been in this for 30 years now in procurement. And I think, yes, we've had things like the economic crisis and some of these other things, but from a supply chain perspective now, This is two enormous disruptions, and I'm sure this isn't the end of it. I think this really is a pattern. So you're talking about the supplier, the relationship, how helpful they can be. That kind of leads us to step 3. We need to do some negotiations now, right? Like there are things that need to happen. How do we go about doing that? How do you negotiate from, inside of a crisis like this? Does negotiation look different? Is it basically the same? Like, how should I be thinking about having this negotiation with my supplier?
I think it's really, really hard, Conrad, isn't it? Because sometimes, like, what can you even offer? Like, let's say you want to offer a commitment or a long-term agreement with a supplier in exchange for their engagement with you on responding to these tariffs. Well, is that the right move, given you don't know where the tariffs will be in a year's time or 6 months' time, right? So can you really get into these long-term agreements? So I think you need to think about what other points of incentive, what other points of leverage do you really have over your suppliers? Here's one thought from me. I think, and I do not envy procurement teams. I know how much procurement teams are overburdened with compliance and now this and finding alternative source of supply. But you got to look at your supplier onboarding and your qualification of not just the supplier, but also if you're sourcing components, going to the factory, qualifying that's the right, quality and the right kind of environment to produce these things. You got to get very fast with this, because that's how you build up leverage with some suppliers probably don't want to deal with you. You need to have a walk away point, and your walk away point should be, well, I can go to this other supplier and I've looked at my onboarding process. I've created exceptions type of process, which will allow me to onboard a supplier very quickly, go out to their factory, wherever they are, whatever new country I want to explore, and just, be there physically and check the products, etc., so that you've got alternative sources, right? So I think negotiation, yes, make sure you've got alternative sources that you're engaging while you're having those negotiations. In terms of negotiations themselves, yeah, you're going to have to incentivize the supplier somehow. It really depends on, every company is a bit different, right? And it depends on the type of relationship that you've got with that supplier and how long you've been working with them, etc. Yeah, I don't know, Natasha, what would be your sort of top levers, let's say, to gain leverage against, remember, suppliers whose phone is off the hook, constantly?
You work with a lot of procurement professionals. Percent, like ratio, 1 to how many understands not how their price structure works, but how their supplier's price structure works. How many procurement professionals do you think know that?
Hardly any, to be honest.
Very few.
Very small number. Very small number.
Right. So, I don't know. The way I look at it is that even though our president is considered to be that he is, the art of the deal making, right? That he is the artist. I subscribe to completely different negotiation style. I don't know how to measure who's been more successful, but I'll stick to mine. And mine is that actually the more openly you talk to your suppliers and the more you understand what costs them money, what their pain points are, and what can help them to reduce the cost of their production and operation, the greater is the chance that however you can help them to make their cost structure a little bit more favorable, the more willing they will be to pass that benefit, at least a share of it, onto you. So I would stick to my philosophy of don't focus as much on your terms and conditions of the deal, but understand what their terms and conditions of the deal are, right? Like, if you know your opponent pain points, business structure, that the greatest kind of like this inflection points, like their vulnerability to tariffs or their vulnerability to risks, the greater is your creative freedom on structuring the deal that would actually work for both sides. And you can rely on, I don't know at this point if we're looking for financial benefits or just securing capacity.
I think that's beautiful, right? And to me, Zach, you were talking about leverage. I think we probably, in most cases, are in a situation where both organizations, and maybe this sounds too dire, but are facing a question of survival. Like we could die by working against each other. We could survive by working together and trying to help each other through this process. And that collaboration that Natasha's talking about, I don't think it has to be arm's length. In some cases, that might be the only appropriate way to do just again, back to the relationship and where is it today. But yeah, the supplier and the buyer in this case really need to work together to figure out an alternative. We talked about, free trade zones. There are probably alternatives or ideas around logistics and shipping that haven't been, all of these things you probably don't even know about, right? In terms of things that we could do that we haven't tried because they have other customers and they're doing other things with other customers. So all of that community intelligence can come together to help. There's just a lot to do here. Now, this is, I'm a bit overwhelmed here. In some ways, I'm thankful that I'm in the middle of a tech startup building solutions that kind of help and enable some of these, some of the pain points and problems that we're talking about, and not sitting behind a chair trying to figure out where I'm going to get that next shipment of aluminum or cobalt or all these other things that are now just almost unattainable from a price and a cost perspective. Those of you that are on the front lines doing that today, you're the heroes of the business. This is that moment where procurement supply chain can shine. Probably 80 or 100 hours a week you'll be shining. So sorry about that, but don't lose hope. So just as a quick summary, right? Getting the visibility, identifying the vulnerabilities, step one. Figuring out how to diversify the supply chain and get alternatives might be really hard to do tactically right now with this crisis, but don't just park it and say it's not important because you can't do it today. As Natasha said, you're going to want that shade. You're going to want to plant the tree. It's going to happen again. So get prepared. The wake up call that you're getting right now is a real reminder that this is going to happen again. And then lastly, let's figure out how to collaborate with the suppliers, come up with tactics and mitigations, and in some cases, full on negotiation. This is where we're going to have to call it a wrap for the day on our podcast. Any last words, Zach and Natasha, like messages of hope and cheer for our friends out there that are on the front lines?
I would just say that suffering alone is no longer in fashion. Like if you lost and you just want to collaborate or just brainstorm with someone how to get out, we're here to help. So just reach out to any of us or to all of us together, and let's talk. Let's help each other to go through these challenging times.
Yeah, and I would say if there was ever any doubt about the increasing importance of procurement to businesses, then this is your case in point. This is going to be great. And it was very difficult, and it'll be a great opportunity in the future for procurement once people start realizing, we really do need to be on a top game.
Yeah, and you probably had the strategies 5 years ago and you couldn't quite get everybody to listen. So maybe now is the time where you have the influence and the capacity to really change business. Well, thank you, everybody. That's another wrap for Practical Insights, Practical Proc-N-Roll. We'll talk to you again soon. Look for us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. And as Natasha said, reach out to any of us anytime. We're all on LinkedIn and a million other ways to get a hold of us. We'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody.